This is the Merkava tank. Home produced by Israel, it is the pride of the Israeli military and a symbol of its military might. It is one of the best protected tanks in the world.
I do know for sure what the Merkava is, what the Israel soldier is. And both of them can hit any other tanks and soldiers around us, no matter the numbers.
But in the modern warfare of today, guerrillas are challenging the role and the relevance of the Merkava.
A man in a ruined building with a handheld missile that was designed in the Soviet Union in the 1970s can still destroy the most up-to-the-minute digitized tank that the world has produced. And the Merkava is no exception to that.
The 1973 Arab-Israeli War was known by the Arabs as the October War and by the Israelis as the Yom Kippur War. It had been a painful lesson for Israel, and in particular the Israeli Tank Corps. 6 years earlier, the Israelis had comprehensively defeated the Arab armies in the Six-Day War. However, by 1973, the Egyptians had rearmed, mindful of Israel's mastery of tank warfare.
The
Soviet Union supplied us with large numbers of anti-tank guided missiles. They were distributed to all levels of Egyptian infantry units.
The Israeli Tank Corps at that time consisted of American-made Patton and British-made Centurion tanks, which the Israelis had upgraded. Israel did not yet have its own tank. On October the 6th, 1973, thousands of Egyptian soldiers crossed the Suez Canal in an attempt to reclaim the Sinai captured by Israel 6 years earlier. The Israelis sent in their tanks to repel the attack.
The Israelis expected that the Egyptian infantry would run away as soon as a tank approached, but this time no one was running.
The Israelis attacked in their usual tactics, and they were met by an incredible barrage of handheld anti-tank wire-guided missiles.
This was the first time in history the anti-tank guided missiles had been used in war.
They lost many tanks, and this was a shock to them. We learned later that most of the Egyptians who came over, those kids, were carrying an anti-tank missile.
The Soviet-made wire-guided anti-tank missiles used by the Egyptians proved stunningly effective. Israel lost hundreds of tanks during the 1973 war. This cemetery in Tel Aviv holds the graves of many of those tank crewmen killed in that war. The Israelis had paid a high price for failing to take heed of new innovations in anti-tank weaponry. This sobering experience was the catalyst for a momentous decision. Israel would build its own tank, a tank that would become known as the Merkava. A telling symbol of the high price paid by the Israeli Tank Corps in the 1973 war can be seen here at the Armored Forces Museum at Latrun, just outside of Jerusalem. This wall lists the names of all Israeli tank crew members killed in all of Israel's wars, starting from 1948. The largest section of this wall is devoted to those killed in the 1973 war. Israel was determined never again to lose so many casualties. After the war, the Israelis formed a committee to work on the design of a new tank, a tank specially designed to counter the tactics and the weapons of Israel's enemies. A former commander of the Israeli armored forces was charged with leading the development team. His name was General Israel Tal.
What was unique about Israel Tal was that he was intelligent, but also egotistical. He wanted to show the Israeli people and the whole world that he could design the perfect tank. A tank which could never be hit by any missile, and which could hit any soldier, whoever he was.
A genius when it comes to tanks. One of the leading experts in the world.
He was the guy who think and, as a matter of fact, push the whole idea to the tank until the very first tank. It was like a personal crusade for him.
The design of the Merkava placed a premium on the survival of the crew. One of the tank's most important features was that, unlike other tanks, the engine was at the front rather than at the rear. This meant the crew would be sitting behind the engine when the tank was moving forward.
It's innovation as a kind of protection. This is protection for the crew. It's a very nice idea.
The idea was that every piece of equipment in that tank, not just the armor, should be used to defend the crew.
Having a forward engine also allowed extra space for infantry. Unlike other tanks, the Merkava doubled as a troop transporter. Its rear door design enabled up to 6 fully equipped soldiers to be carried safely into combat. The rear door also provided an escape route.
The tank plays a secondary role as an armored personnel carrier. The infantry can leave the tank, fight anti-tank crews, and clear the way for the tank to advance.
The new design contained other innovative features. It was lower than other tanks, making it a more difficult target. Crucially, the tank was plated with special reactive armor.
The tank was 63 tons, heavier than any other tank in the world. But Israel Tal said, "I don't care about maneuverability. All I care about is protecting my crew."
The crew compartment was very luxurious, with air conditioning, cold drinking water and extra space for the crew. The soldier in the Merkava is definitely the most comfortable soldier in any tank in the world.
With the design complete, the new tank needed a name that, like the tank itself, would strike fear into Israel's enemies. The name chosen was Merkava.
It was attended by biblical phantoms of power. I mean, it was a highly modern piece of cutting-edge technology, but it was also expressed in sort of archaic biblical terms. I mean, the word Merkava, it means chariot, but it also implies God. It's about theology. It's a piece of the word of God on tracks, tearing over the terrain.
With its religious reference, the Merkava, or God's chariot, was to be a weapon offering a divine-like protection to Israel, and one that would smash its enemies.
When the Israelis used the word with religious connotations for the Merkava, they took it out of its historical context. They surrounded it with an aura. It became unique, terrifying, almost untouchable.
In 1979, the Merkava Mark I rolled off the assembly line, ready for action.